We're in a series at the moment called Dangerous Prayers, and this talk that I felt led to bring this morning, it connects into the series, but I've changed the title. I've rearranged the words. Rather than dangerous prayers, this talk is going to cause us to think on the prayers that we're praying for dangerous places. The prayers that we're praying for dangerous places. Places in the world where there's conflict. Places where there's terrorism. Places where there's the constant state of fear. The daily threat of loss of life. It was a challenge to prep for this talk. Knowing that the regular news, what we watch on our screens, often switches from one conflict to another. Or causes us to think that the lack of coverage means that a conflict is over. Knowing that, I did some research. I went on the internet and explored a site called the International Crisis Group. It headlined 10 conflicts to watch in 2024. In the intro, it said that war has been on the rise. It has been on the rise since about 2012, following a decline in the 1990s and the early 2000s. Headlined were Gaza and a wider Middle Eastern war, Sudan, Ukraine, Myanmar, Ethiopia. The list continued. Conflicts that were either live now and happening or likely to escalate. I'm no expert. I'm no expert on any of these conflicts. I wouldn't claim to be. I'm aware that there are people in the room who know more about it. There are people in the room who have stronger, more expert views than me. However, when it comes to prayers for dangerous places, so I'm going to go to the Bible next, because quite a lot of the Bible was written into or out of dangerous places. The Old Testament. If someone says to me, I've read the Old Testament, and they aren't disturbed by it. Some of the stories, some of the atrocities that are recorded, and even some of what God instructed his people to do, I would argue whether they've read it and thought about it deeply and realize what they are reading is an historic work. Doesn't mean there aren't answers. It doesn't mean that God isn't still gracious and compassionate. It doesn't mean that the God of the Old Testament isn't the God of the New Testament. But I'll admit at times it's difficult to square all of that up. And we have to come back to God. And we have to trust him. Trust the judge of the world. Trust the judge of history. See, when your enemy is actually your enemy, intent on not just killing you, but putting the whole of your people, the whole of your nation to the sword. And when your enemy is pursuing other gods, he is engaged in vile cultic practices, sacrificing their children to the flames, amongst other acts. When it's not only an abomination to the Lord, but to humanity itself, it gives you cause to consider, how would we expect a holy God to respond? But that isn't our context. And also we have the life and the mission of Jesus before us in a way that the Old Testament followers of Yahweh, they didn't have. The New Testament. The New Testament, there's a scene in the New Testament that is helpful here, at least I think it is. It comes as Jesus is traveling through an area that takes him close to a Samaritan village. At the time, Jews and Samaritans, they hated each other. And Jesus and his 12 disciples, they were Jews. And that was the cause of the conversation that they had amongst themselves. They'd been refused, not allowed to travel through the Samaritan village. It's in Luke 9, verses 54 to 55. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire from heaven to destroy them? But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and they went to another village. What were James and John thinking? What was Jesus thinking? Fire from heaven? Sorry to disappoint. That's not exactly the mission that we're on here. And what I admire about them, admire is the wrong word, but I'm sure you understand what I'm trying to say here. James and John had the faith to believe that they could actually do that. They could do that. And what this reveals is the raw material that Jesus was working with. These were the disciples. James and John and the others, these were the disciples who would continue the mission. These were the disciples who would communicate the gospel. The gospel not of wrath, not of fire from heaven, but of grace. They still had, James and John, they still had a lot to learn. This gospel of grace, it was won for us at Calvary, where Jesus died on a cross of suffering instead of us. He died holy and perfect, but carrying our sin, carrying our wrong. And Jesus died, and I'm going to say this slowly, Jesus died as much for the terrorist as he did the pacifist. And I don't fully understand that. I don't always want that to be the case, but it is. And that's the nature of the grace of God. It's God's grace to give, not ours to own, not ours to protect, not ours to claim that it couldn't possibly be for them. At the cross, Jesus took the horrors of this world. He took the individual crimes of the worst of sinners, took it on himself. Took that judgment, took it all on himself, on the cross, and offered it back as boundless grace, as undeserved forgiveness for anyone and everyone who chooses to turn and accept Christ. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus looked over the ancient city of Jerusalem, which now today and for a large part of the history in between has been the scene of conflict, of terrorism, where much blood has been shed. When Jesus looked over that ancient city, he said, Matthew 23 verses 37 to 39, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I've longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate." It's the heart. It's the desire, it's the compassion, it's the willingness of our God through Jesus to forgive again and again and again. It's not meant as a political comment. It's meant as an explanation of grace as I understand it from reading the narrative of the New Testament. And that word, the last one that Jesus spoke, desolate, desolate. How many places globally are desolate as a result of war? And the stories that we hear and the scenes that we watch on our screens, they are meant to shock us. They are meant to break our hearts. They are meant to cause us to pray prayers for dangerous places, to pray prayers for dangerous places. And with those prayers, I ask myself, what scope does the Bible give me for my prayers? What scope, what emotions, what vocabulary can I use? Can I be angry? Yes, I think so. I read about anger in the Bible. Can I be appalled? Yes. Can I claim justice, even punishment for those who perpetrate, who are intent on violence? Yes. And where do I find that? What gives me that scope in the Bible? The Psalms. The Psalms. The songbook, the prayer book, the emotional reservoir of the Bible comes to the fore. And what words come through strong for me as I read those Psalms? They are words like remove, break, bring down the warmongers, those who are gripped by evil, those who pursue their ends at horrendous cost to innocent lives. Give voice, build up, position the peacemakers, those who would negotiate and plead for a measured response, for a cease to the firing. Mercy. I often pray that word, God, please be merciful. And then there's the cross itself. It's core to our belief. The only answer when I pray for forgiveness and grace. Forgiveness and grace, that they would flow like a river, that they would burst like a dam into the lives of people who are caught in cycles of death. Who can't let go of the hurt and the pain that they've experienced. And it's not possible on their own. I mean, why would someone who's lost someone near and dear to them, possibly seen them killed, want to forgive the other who was responsible? Why would they? Why would they? Only by witnessing Jesus. Only by knowing that he walked that road for them. That he faced that pain for them. Only by knowing that he has suffered for each of us and still suffers alongside us. I want to pray now. I want to pray a prayer for dangerous places. I'm sure we would all want to pray a prayer for dangerous places. I'm sure we'd all want to carry the vocabulary and the emotions of the Psalms that put it so much better than I ever could. The depths that's there, exposed. God was always prepared to be exposed and vulnerable. Isn't that the narrative of Jesus? God sending his Son to live among us, to die for us. And God, I pray a prayer for dangerous places. Lord, that you would break, you would bring down those warmongers. That you would build up, that you would position those peacemakers. Lord, that your mercy would be felt right at the center of the conflicts. Lord, that your grace and forgiveness would flow like a river, would burst like a dam into the lives of people who have lost others. Lord, that we would be moved by the stories we hear and the scenes that we watch on our screens, to keep praying these prayers, even if it seems hopeless. There's always the hope of Jesus Christ and the victory that he won when God gave himself sacrificially for us. Lord, continue to lead us into prayers of depth and meaning and healing and forgiveness. Amen.